Hello. Today, I'm taking you into a dark and mysterious case, one that no one could ever fully understand. The story of an artist, a woman who killed her husband. Her silence was more terrifying and louder than any confession. Rain taps softly on the windows of the Hartman house, a rhythmic whisper in the night. Elena sat alone in her studio, brush in hand, staring at the blank canvas. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from anticipation. Outside, the wind rattled the old oak trees, their shadows crawling across the floor like silent witnesses. Michael's absence gnawed at her, yet a strange calm settled over her, a calculated serenity that felt almost unnatural. The city slept, oblivious to the storm within these walls. The studio smelled of oil paint and linseed, but beneath it lingered something else, a faint metallic tang that Elena ignored. She traced the outline of a new sketch, each stroke deliberate, almost ritualistic. Memories of Michael laughing, arguing, and sometimes glaring flashed in her mind. She didn't flinch at them. Instead, she let the anger and betrayal flow into the canvas, twisting colors into shadows that seemed to move on their own. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming like impatient fingers against the roof, echoing the tension inside her chest. Midnight stretched into the early hours, and the city's distant hum faded. Elena's eyes, sharp and unyielding, never left the canvas. She remembered the argument, Michael's voice raised, accusations flying, the subtle threat hidden in his smile. Her hand had moved almost on its own, guided by a force she couldn't name. One precise motion, and everything changed. The life in the room shifted. The air thickened. She felt the weight of the act pressing against her chest. Yet she remained silent, a silent sentinel of her own dark creation. Morning light crept through the blinds, casting narrow stripes across the floor. Elena sat motionless, her hands stained with the deep red of her own choice, her eyes distant, watching the dust float in the pale sunlight. She did not speak, did not cry, and did not tremble. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the silence that screamed inside the Hartman house. Each breath she took was measured, controlled, as if speaking might release something beyond her command, something she feared more than discovery or guilt. The police had yet to arrive. The mail piled up, unopened, and the curtains remained frozen, as if time itself feared to move. Elena rose slowly, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. She walked to the wall where sketches of Michael lay scattered, each one a silent accusation, a memory turned into shadow. Her fingers traced the edges of a drawing she hadn't finished, pausing on the empty eyes she'd left behind. In that stillness, she felt a thrill, a quiet power in controlling what could and could not be revealed. When the police finally forced the door, the house exhaled a breath it had held for too long. Elena knelt beside him, hands coated in dark pigment and blood, eyes fixed on the floor. She did not flinch, did not blink, and did not speak. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the unnatural calm surrounding her. She had become both artist and witness, keeper of a secret too dangerous to utter. Every shadow in the room seemed to lean closer, drawn to her silence, as if the darkness itself awaited her command. At the station, silence followed her like a cloak. Questions fell flat. Even seasoned detectives found themselves frustrated, drawn into the weight of her muteness. Doctors monitored her heartbeat. It was steady, unnervingly calm. Her lawyer left in defeat, murmuring about the calculated resolve he had never seen before. Elena did not protest, did not react. In her quiet, there was a storm brewing, a narrative told not with words, but with the cold, deliberate shaping of each line she drew on walls, paper, and air. On the third night, a guard heard a faint scratching. He approached cautiously, finding Elena crouched low, a tiny piece of charcoal clutched in her fingers. She moved quickly, almost frantically, etching a portrait of Michael on the cell wall. But the face was gone, scratched out, erased, a void where recognition should have been. The lines swirled chaotically, a tempest contained in graphite, reflecting the turmoil in her mind. The guard stepped back, uneasy, sensing that whatever haunted her studio had followed her here. Dr. Ethan Rowe arrived the next morning, calm and composed, yet alert to the tension radiating from her cell. "Elena," he said softly, "I'm here to help." She didn't respond, her gaze distant, hollow, like an empty window. Minutes passed in heavy silence before her eyes met his. He spoke of Michael, of the night, of understanding, but she offered nothing. Her fingers tapped 3 slow, deliberate times on the metal table. A message without words, a warning, carried in rhythm. Ethan shivered. This was not shock, but intent. Over the next week, her cell walls transformed. Every drawing repeated the same scene: a dim room, a picture frame, a half-open door. Sometimes Michael appeared, sometimes only a vague shadow lingered behind the door, its outline shifting each time, taller, thinner, more menacing. Ethan examined them one by one, sensing a memory more than imagination. "What's behind the door, Elena?" he asked one evening. She only glanced at the latest drawing, a faint, cracked smile crossing her lips before she turned away, revealing nothing. 5 nights later, the prison lights flickered and died. Darkness swallowed the corridors, broken only by the occasional hum of struggling generators. Guards rushed past cells, flashlights cutting thin beams into the black. When they reached Elena's door, they froze. A pale, unearthly glow seeped from beneath, soft and liquid-like, reflecting off nothing visible. By the time power returned, the glow had vanished, and so had Elena. The bed remained untouched, the lock engaged, the cameras showing only static. On the wall, a new drawing appeared, as if she had left it in some unseen manner. Elena and Michael standing side by side. But Michael's figure was hollow, empty, a silhouette cut from shadow, while Elena bore a single darkened shadow, twisting unnaturally. Behind them, the half-open door loomed again. This time, a hand reached from the darkness, gripping the edge. Ethan stared, heart hammering, realizing that her silence had contained more than guilt. It had restrained something far older, far more dangerous than human comprehension. Ethan studied the wall for hours, each line pressing against his mind. He whispered Elena's name, though he knew she would not answer. Slowly, a realization sank in. She hadn't feared being blamed for Michael's death. Her silence had been a shield, keeping something locked behind the door, something that should never see the light. Each sketch, each swirl of charcoal was a boundary, a line drawing to contain the unimaginable. And now, with her gone, that boundary was broken, leaving only a warning written in her absence. Beneath the latest drawing, in jagged charcoal letters, were 3 words: "It followed me." No explanation, no signature. Just a simple statement that chilled Ethan to the bone. The room seemed to shrink, shadows bending closer, as if drawn by the words themselves. He touched the wall lightly, half expecting the hand in the drawing to grip his own. Silence pressed in from every corner, leaving him with only the echo of her presence and the terrifying certainty that whatever Elena had contained was now free, lurking just beyond perception. Ethan retraced every step of her last days, every encounter, every sketch, searching for a clue. Each memory felt distorted, like looking through a warped lens. The whispers of the night, the shifting shadows, even the faint metallic scent in the air haunted him. He realized the city had no idea of the darkness that had walked among its streets. And Elena, her calm, calculated silence, had been more than defiance. It was a desperate attempt to hold back something older, something that didn't belong to the human world. The studio back at the Hartman house was now sealed, untouched. Dust covered the sketches, but faint traces of charcoal seemed to shimmer, as if alive. Ethan entered cautiously, feeling the weight of her absence pressing against him. Each brushstroke, each line on the walls, whispered secrets he couldn't fully understand. Memories of Elena's eyes, sharp, hollow, fearless, haunted him. It wasn't guilt that had silenced her, nor fear of law or man. It was the understanding that some truths, once spoken, could never be contained again. In the corner of the studio, a half-finished painting caught Ethan's attention. It depicted a doorway, dark and gaping, beyond which shadows writhed as though alive. Michael's likeness hovered near the threshold, distorted, hollow, frozen in the moment Elena had chosen to erase. Ethan traced the lines with his eyes, feeling a chill crawl down his spine. The air seemed heavier here, charged with the remnants of her fear and control. Every sketch, every shadow, every silence had been a barrier, and now that barrier was gone. Ethan noticed a small crumpled piece of paper under the easel. With trembling hands, he unfolded it. Charcoal scratches formed words that made his stomach tighten. "Do not look behind the door. It is awake." He shivered as the studio seemed to pulse around him, the shadows stretching longer, darker, moving as if alive. The silence pressed in, no longer comforting, but threatening. He realized Elena hadn't fled. She had stayed, confronting something only she could see, something that had now begun to cross into his world. The night outside was thick with rain, mirroring the chaos that had once lived inside the house. Ethan felt a presence behind him, cold and patient. He spun around, but nothing was there. Only shadows, moving unnaturally, clinging to corners. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet his feet remained planted. Elena's warning echoed in his mind. Some things, once unleashed, could not be unseen or unheard. He understood now that her silence had been a shield. A delicate line between the known and the unspeakable. Ethan's gaze returned to the wall where the final drawing remained. The hand gripping the half-open door seemed to twitch, alive in the flickering light. His breath caught as he noticed subtle changes. The shadow behind it had thickened, grown more defined, as though testing the boundary Elena had created. Each line of charcoal pulsed with silent intent, a heartbeat of something beyond comprehension. He realized, with a cold certainty, that whatever she had contained was no longer waiting. It was moving, patient and inevitable. The silence of the studio was suffocating. Ethan's own heartbeat echoed like a drum in the oppressive quiet. He stepped closer to the wall, compelled to understand, yet terrified of what he might see. The shadows shifted subtly, almost teasing, as if aware of his gaze. Elena's sketches had been warnings, instructions, and barriers all at once. Now, without her, the balance was broken. The air vibrated with anticipation, the remnants of her control, lingering like a taut string ready to snap. Ethan's mind raced through every detail he remembered of Elena. Her calm precision, her deliberate gestures, the way she moved through silence like it were a language of its own. He thought of Michael, of the moment it had all changed, and the countless sketches that followed. Each line, each swirl, each shadow had been her attempt to bind the chaos. And now, with her gone, that chaos had no master. The studio seemed to breathe around him, alive, aware, waiting for the next move he might make. The room seemed impossibly large and impossibly small at the same time, the shadows stretching and compressing with each heartbeat. Ethan stepped cautiously toward the doorway depicted in the drawings, feeling the air thicken, charged with a presence he could not see but could sense. The faint metallic scent that had lingered in Elena's studio years ago now filled his nostrils, sharp and cold. He realized with a sinking feeling that the thing Elena had feared was no longer contained, and now it was observing him. Ethan's fingers brushed against the wall, tracing the chaotic lines of the final sketches. The charcoal felt almost warm, pulsing under his touch. The hand in the half-open door seemed closer now, more defined, its grip tightening, as if aware of his presence. A whisper, barely audible, slipped through the silence, something old, patient, and intelligent. He stepped back, heart hammering, realizing that Elena's silence had not been fear, it had been protection. A shield against what was now moving freely in the shadows she had once contained. Ethan turned slowly, scanning the studio. Every shadow felt alive, every flicker of light a signal. He remembered Elena's 3 words on the wall. It followed me. Their simplicity belied the terror they carried. He understood now that she had sacrificed her voice, her freedom, and ultimately herself to keep the entity at bay. And yet here he was, alone, confronted by the consequences of her silence. The room seemed to pulse with a rhythm not his own. And he realized that whatever had been contained was no longer patient. It was hungry. A sudden cold swept through the studio, brushing Ethan's neck and sending shivers down his spine. The sketches on the walls seemed to shift subtly, shadows bending unnaturally, as if the charcoal lines themselves were alive. He realized that the drawings had not only been warnings, they had been anchors, holding something in place. And now, without Elena, the anchors had weakened. The presence behind the door had begun to stretch beyond the lines she had drawn, testing its freedom with quiet, deliberate patience. Ethan's pulse quickened as he stepped closer to the half-open door depicted in the sketches. The shadows thickened, dark and restless, creeping along the edges of the room like fingers seeking a surface to cling to. He felt the weight of Elena's intent pressing against him, the restraint, the careful control that had kept the darkness bound. And now, with her gone, that weight shifted. He understood that her silence had been more than defiance. It had been a containment ritual, delicate and precise, now unraveling before his eyes. The air grew heavier, thick with anticipation. Ethan could feel it around him, a subtle vibration in the walls, the floor, even in the flickering lights. Every shadow in the room seemed to watch him, stretching and bending toward the doorway. He swallowed hard, remembering Elena's calm, unblinking eyes and the way she had embraced silence as her only weapon. Now alone, he realized that silence had been her only protection, not from humans, but from something far older, far more relentless. Ethan's hand hovered over the wall, tracing the lines of the charcoal sketches one last time. The half-open door in the final drawing seemed to pulse with a dark life of its own. A subtle movement caught his eye, a shadow shifting, almost breathing. He realized that Elena's warnings were not just about what was behind the door, but about what would follow anyone who dared to look. The studio, once her domain, now belonged to something else entirely. Something that had learned the patterns of fear and silence from its creator. Ethan stepped back, his breath shallow, heart hammering in the oppressive quiet. The shadows clung to every corner, moving subtly as if alive. The words, "It followed me," echoed in his mind, carrying the weight of unseen horrors. He understood now that Elena's silence had been a shield, a boundary drawn with her art, her fear, and her control. And now that boundary was gone. Whatever she had contained was no longer behind the door. It had stepped into the world, patient, deliberate, and watching. Outside, the storm had calmed, leaving a hushed, eerie stillness over the city. Ethan felt the chill of the night seep into his bones, carrying with it the lingering presence of Elena's unseen adversary. He turned back to the wall one last time, studying the final sketches, each line a testament to her struggle. It was clear now. She had not been defiant, not cruel, not insane. She had been a guardian, using silence as her weapon, creating art that bound something far older and far darker than anyone could imagine. Ethan's eyes scanned the studio, lingering on the scattered brushes, the overturned sketches, the faint stains that whispered of violence and obsession. The air seemed to thicken with each step he took, shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. He realized that Elena's absence was not merely physical. Her presence lingered in every line, every shadow, every silent warning. And somewhere, just beyond perception, the thing she had contained was moving, patient, and aware, as if testing the boundaries she had once so carefully drawn. The final sketch on the wall drew Ethan's attention like a magnet. The half-open door yawned in charcoal, its edges jagged, almost alive. The hand emerging from the darkness seemed to twitch subtly, testing the air, probing for weakness. He felt the weight of Elena's restraint pressing down on him, a silent force that had kept the entity at bay. And now, alone, he understood the full gravity of her sacrifice. Her silence had been a shield against something older, wiser, and infinitely more dangerous than human comprehension. Ethan's breathing grew shallow as he stepped closer to the wall. The sketches seemed to vibrate subtly under his gaze, lines bending and twisting as if alive. He realized Elena had poured herself into these drawings, not just fear, but understanding, control, and ritual. Every swirl of charcoal was a boundary, every shadow a warning. And now, with her gone, the balance had shifted. The thing behind the door was no longer contained. It was patient, deliberate. And learning from him as he watched. The studio seemed to breathe, shadows stretching and pulsing with a life of their own. Ethan's eyes darted across the walls, noting every line, every swirl of charcoal. The hand in the half-open door seemed closer now, almost reaching out. He felt a pull, a silent invitation or warning that made his skin crawl. Elena's silence echoed in his mind, heavy and purposeful. She had understood the danger, had contained it, and had disappeared to ensure the entity remained bound, at least for a time. Ethan backed away slowly, yet his gaze remained fixed on the wall. Each sketch seemed to ripple slightly, shadows deepening where they shouldn't. The air was thick, almost tangible, carrying the faint scent of metal and paint, a reminder of Elena's last moments. He realized the entity she had contained was no longer patient. It was curious, probing, testing the space she had left behind. Her silence had been her shield, her art a barrier. And now that barrier was weakening with every heartbeat. Ethan's mind raced, retracing every encounter he had with Elena, every sketch, every silent moment that had unnerved him. The shadows in the studio seemed to react, stretching, contracting, alive with a subtle intelligence. He understood now that she had not been defiant or cruel. She had been deliberate, using silence and art as tools to bind a presence older and far more dangerous than any human mind could grasp. And with her gone, that presence tested its freedom with quiet, deliberate patience. The room felt impossibly heavy, the air thick with anticipation. Ethan's footsteps echoed unnaturally as he moved closer to the wall, drawn by a mix of fear and fascination. The charcoal lines seemed to shift subtly, shadows bending and twitching, alive in ways he couldn't explain. Elena's intent lingered, a silent force that had once held the darkness at bay. Now, that force was absent, leaving the entity free to explore, to learn, and to stretch beyond the boundaries she had so painstakingly drawn. Ethan's heart pounded as he scanned the room. Every brush, every spilled paint, every scrap of paper seemed imbued with Elena's presence. The shadows twisted unnaturally in the corners, reaching, testing, alive. The hand in the half-open door seemed to twitch, subtly, intentionally. He realized that her silence had not been for punishment, nor out of fear. It had been protection, a careful containment of something far older, far more intelligent, and far more patient than he could comprehend. Ethan stepped closer, drawn to the half-open door in the sketches. The shadows seemed to lean forward, alive, testing the limits of the space she had left behind. The faint metallic scent of blood and paint filled the air, mingling with a deeper, indefinable presence. He realized that Elena's silence had been deliberate, a calculated shield, and that her art had been more than expression. It had been a cage. Now, with her gone, the cage was weakening, and the entity she had contained was awake, patient, and aware. The studio seemed to pulse with a subtle rhythm, as if alive. Ethan's gaze shifted from sketch to sketch, tracing the lines of charcoal, feeling the weight of Elena's intent in every mark. The half-open door in the final drawing seemed to breathe, the shadow behind it thickening, curling, probing. He realized her silence had been more than refusal. It had been control, protection, and ritual. And now, with her gone, the balance had shifted, leaving him alone with the consequences of her art. Ethan felt the air thicken, heavy with unseen presence. Shadows twisted unnaturally along the walls, moving subtly, testing the boundaries that Elena had drawn. Every brush, every scattered sketch whispered of restraint, of fear, carefully shaped into form. He understood now that her silence had been deliberate, a barrier against something ancient and patient. And now that barrier was weakening, leaving him to confront the consequences of what she had contained with her art and her silence. Ethan's eyes lingered on the half-open door in the sketches. The hand reaching from the darkness seemed closer now, sharper, more deliberate. The shadows around it pulsed subtly, alive with intelligence. He realized that Elena had not been defiant. She had been strategic, using silence and art as her shield against something far older and more cunning than any human mind could comprehend. And now, with her gone, that shield had weakened, leaving the entity free to move beyond the lines she had drawn. The studio seemed impossibly quiet, yet the shadows whispered, twisting and stretching unnaturally. Ethan's heart raced as he stepped closer to the wall, drawn by the half-open door in the sketches. The hand in the charcoal lines seemed to twitch, probing, testing. He realized Elena's silence had been her weapon, her art a cage for something older, patient, and relentless. And now, with her gone, that cage had weakened. leaving him alone with a presence that no human could fully comprehend. Ethan backed away slightly, his eyes never leaving the half-open door in the sketches. The shadows shifted subtly, curling toward him, aware of his gaze. He could feel the weight of Elena's restraint, the careful control she had maintained through silence and art. And now, without her, that control had faltered. The presence she had contained was testing the limits, patient and deliberate, waiting for the moment it could move beyond the boundaries she had drawn with such care. The room seemed to pulse with quiet life. Ethan's gaze lingered on the wall, tracing the jagged lines of the sketches. The half-open door and the hand emerging from its darkness seemed to shift, subtly, almost intentionally. He realized that Elena's silence had not been mere stubbornness. It had been a calculated barrier, a form of control. Now with her gone, the entity she had bound was free to stretch its awareness, patient, observant, and undeniably alive. Ethan took a hesitant step closer, feeling the weight of the unseen presence pressing against him. The shadows around the sketches pulsed, dark and restless, alive in ways he couldn't explain. The hand in the half-open door seemed to twitch, testing his reaction. He understood now that Elena's silence had been deliberate, a shield that contained something ancient and relentless. And with her absence, that containment was unraveling, leaving him alone with what she had fought to restrain. The studio air grew heavy, almost tangible, as Ethan's eyes scanned the walls. Each sketch seemed to ripple subtly, shadows bending unnaturally along the edges. The hand emerging from the half-open door appeared closer now, its charcoal lines sharper, more deliberate. Ethan realized Elena's silence had been a form of control, a barrier crafted with care. And now, with her gone, the entity she had contained was no longer restrained. It was patient, intelligent, and fully aware of the world beyond the sketches. Ethan's gaze lingered on the wall, tracing the final sketches with trembling hands. The shadows behind the half-open door seemed to shift subtly, curling like smoke, alive and deliberate. He realized that Elena had not been defiant or insane. She had been strategic, using silence and art to bind something far older and more cunning than any human could comprehend. Now, with her gone, that careful restraint had vanished, leaving him face to face with a presence that waited. Patient and inevitable. The studio felt alive, shadows stretching and twisting in ways that made Ethan's skin crawl. Every sketch seemed imbued with Elena's intent, her fear, and her control. The half-open door in the final drawing pulsed subtly, the hand reaching from the darkness twitching, probing. He understood now that her silence had not been mere stubbornness. It had been containment, a delicate boundary against something ancient, patient, and aware. And with her gone, that boundary was dissolving. Ethan stepped back, his breath shallow, heart pounding in the oppressive quiet. The shadows in the studio seemed to move independently, curling and stretching as if alive. The half-open door in the sketches drew his eyes, the hand emerging from the darkness, twitching with subtle intent. He realized that Elena's silence had been more than defiance, it had been protection. And now, without her, the presence she had contained was free to explore, deliberate, and learn from the world beyond her art. The studio seemed impossibly still, yet the shadows pulsed, alive with subtle awareness. Ethan's eyes traced the jagged lines of the sketches, feeling the weight of Elena's restraint in every stroke. The hand in the half-open door appeared closer, sharper, testing the limits. He realized now that her silence had been a shield, her art a cage against something far older and more patient than any human mind could grasp. And with her gone, that cage was beginning to unravel. Ethan's gaze lingered on the final sketch, heart hammering in his chest. The shadows around the half-open door seemed to breathe, stretching and curling subtly. The hand emerging from the darkness twitched, deliberate and aware. He understood that Elena's silence had been a deliberate containment, a fragile boundary drawn with art and fear. Now, with her gone, that boundary had weakened, and the presence she had restrained was moving, patient and observant, testing its freedom. The studio seemed to pulse with unseen life, shadows twisting unnaturally along the walls. Ethan's eyes darted across every sketch, feeling the weight of Elena's intent in each line. The half-open door in the final drawing loomed, the hand reaching out, twitching subtly. He realized that her silence had not been stubbornness, nor madness, but a calculated act of protection. And now, with her absence, the entity she had contained was free, patient, and aware. Stretching its presence beyond the lines she had drawn. Ethan took a hesitant step forward, the air thick and heavy with presence. Shadows curled and stretched, responding to his movements, as if aware. The half-open door in the sketches pulsed with subtle life, the hand reaching out, deliberate. He realized that Elena's silence had been a barrier, her art a cage against something ancient and intelligent. Now, alone, he understood that the cage was failing, and the entity she had restrained was testing the space she had left behind. The studio air grew colder, denser, pressing against Ethan like a living thing. Every shadow seemed to twitch, to stretch in ways that defied natural movement. The half-open door in the sketches loomed, the hand within it curling, probing. He realized the full extent of Elena's sacrifice. Her silence, her art, had been a containment, a fragile barrier, and now that barrier was weakening. The presence she had restrained was awake, patient, and learning, observing every movement, every breath. Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the wall, tracing the jagged lines of the charcoal sketches. The half-open door seemed to pulse, alive with subtle motion, and the hand emerging from the darkness twitched, testing boundaries. Shadows stretched unnaturally, curling like smoke. He realized that Elena's silence had been more than restraint. It had been a protective measure, a calculated barrier. Now, with her gone, that barrier was unraveling, leaving the entity free to explore and expand beyond the sketches she had drawn. The studio seemed alive, breathing around Ethan, shadows twisting and curling with subtle intent. The half-open door in the sketches loomed larger in his mind, the hand within twitching deliberately. Every line of charcoal felt weighted, charged with Elena's intent, her fear, her control. He understood now that her silence had been a shield, her art a cage against something ancient and relentless. And with her absence, that cage was weakening, leaving him alone with a presence far older and more patient than any human could imagine. Ethan's heartbeat echoed in the studio, loud in the oppressive quiet. Shadows shifted subtly, curling and stretching unnaturally along the walls. The half-open door in the sketches seemed to breathe, alive, the hand reaching out with deliberate motion. He realized Elena's silence had been her weapon. Her art, a careful barrier against something ancient and intelligent. Now, that barrier was fraying. The presence she had restrained was moving, patient, deliberate, and aware, waiting for its moment beyond the drawings. Ethan stepped back, the weight of the studio pressing against him. Shadows twisted unnaturally, curling and stretching as if alive. The half-open door in the sketches seemed closer, more defined, the hand reaching outward with subtle, deliberate motion. He realized now that Elena's silence had been strategic, a calculated shield against something older, patient, and intelligent. And with her gone, that shield was faltering, leaving him alone with the presence she had fought to contain. The air in the studio thickened, heavy and oppressive, pressing on Ethan's chest. The shadows stretched unnaturally, curling like fingers across the walls and floor. The half-open door in the sketches loomed in his mind, the hand within twitching subtly, aware of his presence. He understood now that Elena's silence had been a deliberate barrier, her art a cage for something ancient and intelligent. And with her gone, that cage was weakening, leaving him alone with an entity patient, observant, and calculating. Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the wall, tracing the chaotic lines of the sketches. The shadows behind the half-open door seemed to twist and pulse, alive in ways he could feel but not see. The hand reaching from the darkness twitched deliberately. He realized that Elena's silence had been a form of control, a careful containment of something far older and more intelligent than human comprehension. And now, with her gone, that containment was unraveling, leaving him face to face with the consequences of her sacrifice. The studio seemed impossibly still, yet shadows twisted subtly, curling and stretching as if alive. Ethan's heart raced, every line of charcoal drawing on the wall, carrying Elena's intent. The half-open door loomed in his mind, the hand reaching outward with deliberate motion. He realized now that her silence had been protection, her art a cage against something ancient, patient, and intelligent. And with her absence, that cage was weakening, leaving him alone with what she had fought to contain. Ethan stepped closer to the wall, the air heavy with unseen presence. Shadows twisted unnaturally, curling and stretching toward him. The half-open door in the sketches seemed alive, the hand reaching out, testing. He understood that Elena's silence had not been stubbornness or defiance. It had been deliberate, a careful containment of something far older, intelligent, and patient. And now, with her gone, that containment was failing, leaving him alone with an entity aware of every movement, every breath. The studio's shadows thickened, curling along the walls with unnatural intent. Ethan's eyes darted across the sketches, feeling the weight of Elena's restraint in every line. The half-open door seemed to pulse subtly, the hand within twitching as if sensing him. He realized that her silence had been strategic, her art a cage, and her control precise. Now, alone, he understood that the cage was weakening, and the entity she had contained was learning, patient, and ready to step beyond the boundaries she had drawn. Ethan felt the oppressive weight of the studio pressing in, shadows curling and stretching unnaturally. The half-open door in the sketches loomed in his mind, the hand twitching subtly, deliberate. He realized Elena's silence had been her weapon, her art a cage against something ancient, patient, and intelligent. And now, with her gone, the cage was unraveling. The presence she had restrained was awake, aware, and testing the space she had left behind with careful, deliberate patience. Ethan's heart pounded as he scanned the room, shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. The half-open door in the sketches seemed alive, pulsing subtly, the hand within twitching deliberately. He realized that Elena's silence had been a shield, a calculated barrier against something far older and more intelligent than human comprehension. And now, with her gone, that shield was weakening, leaving him face to face with a presence patient, aware, and ready to explore the world beyond the lines she had drawn. The air in the studio grew heavier, thick with an almost tangible presence. Shadows twisted, curling along the walls with unnatural intent. The half-open door in the sketches seemed to breathe, the hand reaching out, deliberate and probing. Ethan understood now that Elena's silence had not been stubbornness. It had been containment, control, a carefully drawn boundary. And with her gone, that boundary was failing, leaving him alone with something patient, intelligent, and inevitably aware of his every move. Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the final sketch, tracing the jagged lines with trembling hands. The half-open door pulsed subtly, shadows stretching unnaturally, curling as if alive. The hand within twitched deliberately, testing him. He realized that Elena's silence had been a shield, her art a cage against something ancient and patient. And now, with her gone, that cage was weakening, leaving him alone with a presence far older and more intelligent than he could comprehend. The studio seemed alive, shadows pulsing subtly along the walls. Ethan's gaze lingered on the half-open door in the sketches, the hand within twitching, deliberate. Every line of charcoal carried Elena's intent, her fear, her control. He understood that her silence had been more than restraint. It had been containment, a fragile boundary against something ancient and intelligent. And now, with her gone, That boundary was dissolving, leaving him alone with a patient, observing presence. Ethan stepped back, feeling the oppressive weight of the studio pressing against him. Shadows twisted and stretched unnaturally, curling like living things. The half-open door in the sketches loomed larger in his mind, the hand reaching out subtly, testing boundaries. He realized now that Elena's silence had been a calculated act, a barrier against something older and more intelligent than any human. And with her absence, that barrier was faltering, leaving him alone with a presence that was patient, aware, and deliberate. The studio's air thickened, heavy with unseen presence. Shadows curled unnaturally, moving subtly along walls and floor. The half-open door in the sketches seemed alive, the hand within twitching deliberately. Ethan understood that Elena's silence had not been mere stubbornness. It had been containment, her art a carefully drawn cage for something ancient and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that cage was weakening, leaving him alone with a presence aware, patient, and testing the limits of freedom. Ethan's gaze lingered on the sketches, heart hammering in his chest. The half-open door pulsed subtly, shadows curling and stretching with unnatural intent. The hand within twitched, deliberate, aware of his presence. He realized that Elena's silence had been more than defiance. It had been protection, a boundary drawn with care. And now, with her gone, that boundary was unraveling, leaving him alone with something patient, intelligent, and observing every movement he made. The studio seemed impossibly still, yet shadows twisted subtly along the walls, curling and stretching unnaturally. Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the half-open door in the sketches, the hand within twitching with deliberate intent. He realized that Elena's silence had been a shield, her art a cage against something far older and more intelligent than human comprehension. And with her gone, that cage was weakening, leaving him alone with a presence patient, aware, and inevitably curious about the world beyond the sketches. Ethan stepped closer, the air thick and pressing against his chest. Shadows twisted unnaturally, curling and stretching along the walls. The half-open door in the sketches loomed in his mind, the hand reaching out subtly, testing him. He realized that Elena's silence had been a calculated measure, her art a cage containing something ancient and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that cage was failing, leaving him alone with a presence that was patient, deliberate, and undeniably aware of every move. Ethan felt the oppressive weight of the studio pressing in, shadows curling and stretching unnaturally along the walls. The half-open door in the sketches loomed closer, the hand within twitching subtly, deliberate. He understood that Elena's silence had not been stubbornness or defiance. It had been a calculated containment of something far older, patient and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that containment was weakening, leaving him alone with a presence aware, observant, and ready to explore the world beyond the boundaries she had drawn. Ethan's eyes scanned the room, shadows twisting and curling as if alive. The half-open door in the sketches pulsed subtly, the hand within reaching outward, deliberate and aware. He realized that Elena's silence had been a carefully constructed shield, her art a cage against something ancient and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that cage was failing. The entity she had contained was testing the limits, patient, observing, and ready to extend beyond the confines of her drawings. The studio seemed impossibly still, yet shadows twisted unnaturally, curling along the walls like living things. Ethan's gaze stayed fixed on the half-open door in the sketches, the hand within twitching subtly, testing him. He realized now that Elena's silence had been a protective measure, her art a barrier against something far older and more intelligent than any human could understand. And with her gone, that barrier was weakening, leaving him alone with a presence, patient, deliberate, and fully aware. Ethan stepped closer, the air thick and heavy, pressing against his chest. Shadows twisted unnaturally, curling along the walls, moving almost with intent. The half-open door in the sketches loomed in his mind, the hand within twitching subtly, probing. He understood now that Elena's silence had been strategic, a careful cage containing something ancient and intelligent. And with her gone, that cage was failing, leaving him alone with a presence that was patient, observing, and calculating. The studio's shadows thickened, stretching and curling with unnatural intent. Ethan's gaze lingered on the sketches, feeling the weight of Elena's restraint in every line. The half-open door pulsed subtly, the hand within twitching, deliberate, aware. He realized that her silence had been more than restraint. It had been containment, a carefully drawn barrier against something ancient and patient. And now, with her gone, that barrier was unraveling, leaving him alone with a presence that observed every movement, every breath. Ethan's heartbeat echoed in the heavy silence, each pulse magnified by the oppressive shadows. The half-open door in the sketches seemed alive, the hand within twitching subtly, testing him. He understood now that Elena's silence had been her shield, a deliberate containment of something far older, patient, and intelligent. And with her absence, that containment was weakening, leaving him alone with a presence observing, learning, and poised to extend beyond the confines of her carefully drawn art. The air in the studio thickened, pressing against Ethan's chest, shadows curling and twisting unnaturally along the walls. The half-open door in the sketches loomed, the hand within twitching deliberately, testing his presence. He realized that Elena's silence had not been defiance. It had been strategic, a carefully drawn cage restraining something ancient and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that cage was weakening, leaving him alone with a patient, aware nod, and observant entity ready to explore beyond the drawings. Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the sketches, the jagged lines alive with tension. Shadows twisted along the walls, curling like living smoke. The half-open door pulsed subtly, the hand within twitching, deliberate and aware. He understood that Elena's silence had been a careful shield, her art a cage for something far older and more intelligent than human comprehension. And now, with her gone, that cage was fraying, leaving him alone with a presence patient, calculating, and ready to move beyond the boundaries she had drawn. The studio seemed impossibly still, yet shadows twisted and curled with unnatural intent. Ethan's gaze lingered on the half-open door in the sketches, the hand within twitching subtly, testing him. He realized that Elena's silence had been a protective measure, her art a deliberate barrier against something ancient, patient, and intelligent. And with her gone, that barrier was weakening, leaving him alone with a presence aware, observing, and poised to explore beyond the confines of her drawings. Ethan stepped closer, feeling the air thicken around him, heavy with unseen presence. Shadows twisted unnaturally, curling along the walls, stretching as if alive. The half-open door in the sketches loomed in his mind, the hand within twitching deliberately, testing him. He realized that Elena's silence had been strategic, her art a cage restraining something ancient and intelligent. Now, with her gone, that cage was failing, leaving him alone with a patient, observant, and calculating presence. The studio's shadows thickened, curling and stretching with unnatural intent. Ethan's gaze lingered on the sketches, feeling the weight of Elena's restraint in every line. The half-open door pulsed subtly, the hand within twitching deliberately, aware of him. He realized that her silence had been more than defiance. It had been containment, a careful barrier against something ancient and patient. And now, with her gone, that barrier was unraveling, leaving him alone with a presence that observed every movement he made. Ethan's heartbeat echoed in the oppressive quiet, each pulse magnified by the studio's heavy shadows. The half-open door in the sketches seemed alive, the hand within twitching subtly, deliberate. He realized that Elena's silence had been a shield, a careful containment of something far older, patient, and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that containment was weakening, leaving him alone with a presence observing, learning, and poised to stretch beyond the boundary she had drawn. The air grew thick around Ethan, shadows curling and stretching with unnatural intent along the walls. The half-open door in the sketches loomed larger, the hand within twitching subtly, deliberate. He realized that Elena's silence had been strategic, a carefully drawn cage restraining something ancient and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that cage was weakening, leaving him alone with a patient, aware, and observing presence, ready to explore beyond the sketches. Ethan's gaze stayed fixed on the sketches, the jagged charcoal lines almost vibrating with tension. Shadows twisted along the walls, curling like living smoke. The half-open door pulsed subtly, the hand within twitching deliberately, testing him. He realized that Elena's silence had been more than defiance. It had been protection, a careful containment of something ancient and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that containment was fraying, leaving him alone with a presence patient, deliberate, and fully aware of his every movement. The studio seemed impossibly still, yet shadows twisted and curled with unnatural intent. Ethan's gaze lingered on the half-open door in the sketches, the hand within twitching subtly, probing. He realized that Elena's silence had been a protective measure, her art a barrier against something ancient, patient, and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that barrier was weakening, leaving him alone with a presence aware, observing, and ready to move beyond the confines of her drawings. Ethan stepped closer, the air heavy and pressing against his chest, shadows curling along the walls like living things. The half-open door in the sketches loomed in his mind, the hand within twitching subtly, testing him. He realized that Elena's silence had been deliberate, her art a cage restraining something ancient and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that cage was failing, leaving him alone with a presence patient, calculating, and fully aware of his every move. Studio shadows thickened, curling and stretching unnaturally. Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the sketches, sensing the weight of Elena's restraint in every line. The half-open door pulsed subtly, the hand within twitching deliberately, aware of him. He understood that her silence had been more than defiance. It had been containment, a careful barrier against something ancient and patient. And now, with her gone, that barrier was unraveling, leaving him alone with a presence observing every movement. Ethan's heartbeat echoed through the studio, each pulse magnified by the oppressive shadows. The half-open door in the sketches seemed alive, the hand within twitching subtly, testing his presence. He realized that Elena's silence had been a shield, a carefully constructed barrier restraining something far older, patient, and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that shield was weakening, leaving him alone with a presence aware, observing, and poised to extend beyond the boundaries she had drawn. The air around Ethan thickened, heavy with an unseen weight. Shadows twisted and curled along the walls with unnatural intent. The half-open door in the sketches loomed larger, the hand within twitching subtly, deliberate. He realized that Elena's silence had been strategic, a careful containment of something ancient and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that containment was weakening, leaving him alone with a patient, aware, and observing presence ready to explore beyond the sketches. Ethan's gaze stayed locked on the sketches, each jagged line alive with tension. Shadows twisted along the walls, curling like living smoke. The half-open door pulsed subtly, the hand within twitching deliberately, aware of him. He understood that Elena's silence had been more than stubbornness. It had been protection, a carefully drawn cage for something ancient and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that cage was unraveling, leaving him alone with a presence, patient, calculating, and fully aware of every movement he made. The studio seemed impossibly still, yet shadows twisted and curled unnaturally along the walls. Ethan's gaze lingered on the half-open door in the sketches, the hand within twitching subtly, probing. He realized that Elena's silence had been a protective measure, her art a barrier against something ancient, patient, and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that barrier was weakening, leaving him alone with a presence aware, observing, and poised to move beyond the confines of her drawings. Ethan stepped closer, the air thick and heavy around him, shadows curling along the walls like living things. The half-open door in the sketches loomed in his mind, the hand within twitching subtly, testing him. He realized that Elena's silence had been deliberate, her art a cage restraining something ancient and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that cage was failing, leaving him alone with a presence patient, calculating, and fully aware of every move he made. The studio's shadows thickened, curling and stretching unnaturally across the walls. Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the sketches, sensing the weight of Elena's restraint in every line. The half-open door pulsed subtly, the hand within twitching deliberately, aware of him. He understood that her silence had been more than defiance. It had been containment, a careful barrier against something ancient and patient. And now, with her gone, that barrier was unraveling, leaving him alone with a presence observing every movement. Ethan's heartbeat echoed through the studio, each pulse magnified by the oppressive shadows. The half-open door in the sketches seemed alive, the hand within twitching subtly, testing his presence. He realized that Elena's silence had been a shield, a carefully constructed barrier restraining something far older, patient, and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that shield was weakening, leaving him alone with a presence aware, observing, and poised to extend beyond the boundaries she had drawn. The studio fell into absolute stillness, yet the shadows continued to twist, curling and stretching like living tendrils. Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the sketches, the half-open door pulsing subtly, the hand within twitching deliberately, as if aware of his gaze. He realized finally that Elena's silence had been a barrier, a careful containment of something ancient, patient, and intelligent. And now, with her gone, that barrier was gone too. He was alone with a presence that had learned, that waited, and that now knew freedom.
Thank you for listening and watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling and unforgettable stories.